Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Straight Talk. We had a short break for Maghrib Salah, so alhamdulillah, let's start and continue with the show, inshallah. Before we proceed, an important announcement. From next week, Straight Talk will be aired on Thursday at 9 p.m. So please make sure you join us on Thursday and not on Fridays. Remember, it's every Thursday at 9 p.m. Also, we have launched a new website for Straight Talk featuring all our previous shows, which you can listen online or download as podcasts. So please check it out and join in with the discussion online, inshallah. Moving on to tonight's discussion, we want to look at the rise of atheism, because in today's secular liberal society, it is something that is seen as a progressive thinking. Although UK is a Christian country, people are generally moving away from religious beliefs and questioning the need of a creator. So call in and get involved in tonight's discussion, inshallah. We want to hear your views on this subject. Call or text 074 7708 0248 or tweet us at Middle Path Radio. So here to discuss, we have with us, alhamdulillah, brother Abdul Bashir, who is a community youth activist, and brother Nizal Hussain, our regular contributor to this show. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi.
So let me start with brother Bashir. Can you explain to our listeners what is atheism and its key features and its basis of thinking? I know there's a lot, but...
That's a very big question.
Okay.
Basically, if I was to put it in very simple language for people to understand, atheism is the non-belief that people do not believe in a creator or any creators. It starts off from the premise that there is no creator.
Okay.
There is no supreme being, or whichever other language you want to put that word into. There's no creator, there's no there's no... God, none of that.
That's the basic
premise it starts off from.
Okay.
So the proponents would argue is the people who believe in a creator or more than one creator, they need to bring the argument first, because they would argue from empirical sciences and evolution that they can prove that there is no such thing as a creator.
So the default position is there's no creator.
There is no creator.
Well, for Muslims, we have there is creator, and then
we prove that.
Absolutely,
and for us, the default position is there is a creator.
Okay.
So this is the basic point. But the thing to appreciate about atheism is that it's a belief on its own that can fit into any system. Okay. When I say any system, I mean any non-religious system. So you can, for example, be an atheist and be secular. You can also be atheist and be a communist. It's not there's no contradiction for them.
Can you be an atheist and become and be a Hindu or a Buddhist?
Intellectually, no. Buddhist is slightly different because their theory is that there is no creator. They believe in this power, and this power is the one that originates the universe, etc. I don't want to get into that. But the point is, there is a small minority of Buddhist monks who are actually atheist. They don't believe in supreme creator or creators. But it's main proponents would argue it's against religion. So any religion, for example, Christianity, Judaism, the standard ones, it's against that. That is their main point. But however, the thing to appreciate from all of that is not all atheists agree with, for example, the origins of the universe.
Okay.
The most famous atheist today, for example, Richard Dawkins, would argue an evolutionary origins of the universe. Some atheists don't agree with him, but they agree that there's no creator. So they have their own theories about, actually, we don't agree with you. We think the universe came about this way, for example. So there's dispute amongst them, but
so
the unifying...
difference of thoughts.
That's right. There's different madhahibs, maybe you could say, yeah? But the unifying factor among them is there's no God or there's no gods. We don't need a supreme being to explain to us the origins of the universe.
Okay, Nizal, what's your take on this?
Okay, I mean, atheism is one end of the spectrum where they absolutely do not believe in any god in any shape or form. But in today's society, in modern secular society across the globe, but particularly in the Western world, there's a strong culture of something called agnosticism that's developing. And agnosticism is kind of the you can say it's the twin brother of atheism. It's agnosticism. It's a viewpoint that it doesn't believe in organized religion. first of all.
Can
but
you
it
explain
doesn't.
to a simplest term for because what is this? Atheist, agnostic.
Okay, so
are they not the same thing?
well,
It's just
they're different, and there's important differences. So essentially, both of them do not believe in any religion.
okay.
That's the first thing.
So they don't believe in God. Full stop.
Well, this is the thing, they reject religion, but agnosticism is different from atheism because agnostics, they're not too sure whether there is a God or there isn't a God. So they're neither here or there. But however, having said that, agnostics, they form a very strong intellectual case where they say to atheists, you cannot disprove there is no God. And they do that by saying essentially science, which atheists always tend to use to prove there is no God. Agnostics claim that science cannot prove there is or there isn't a God because science is just...
So they're undecided, yeah?
Essentially, but more than that, they do have... Because agnostics, they divide into various different groups, but generally, you got the majority of agnostics today who, they're neither here or there. They're not sure whether there is a God or not. They've lost faith in different religions, but there is an intellectual position within some agnostics where they strongly stand against atheism in that they say that science is all about process. It talks about how things came about, but not necessarily where they came from or why.
So it doesn't say why.
So exactly, that's it.
It says
Science.
It says where it came from. Doesn't want to discuss this. Yeah.
That's it. So agnostics do not. They don't entertain the idea that there is no God or that there is a God.
Okay. But that's well, let's go into a little bit more. Yeah. So, I mean, how do you explain this? I mean, how did this come about? I mean, we've got secularism, you've got atheism. I mean, are they all different thinking, or
they're all interlinked? I mean, for example, with agnosticism, even if someone is not a full-on atheist, which is the extreme end of the spectrum, they reject religion. Yeah. Which agnostics do, but atheism also rejects any possibility of there being a creator, an entity, a force that initiated the Big Bang and whatnot. But there is a general culture of agnosticism where people have lost faith in religion. They're not sure whether there's a God or there isn't a God. And you can see this general culture within modern secular Western society. I remember a bus advert, a while back, a few months back, there was a bus advert with the saying on there, and it was promoted by the secular society, and it said, there probably is no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy life. And that's something that was promoted along the the buses on London Underground as well.
You said secular society. Who are they? I mean, what's their...
So secularists is slightly more political. But with secularism, although secularism is more political, it's they all kind of share a very similar value, which is you need to separate religion from social life. Secularism fundamentally is all about you need to separate religion from politics. Can you be politics.
A secular and a religious person?
In theory, yes, you can. Okay. You can. Yeah.
Okay. What's your thought
in theory
on
that? Yes, you can, but it depends how you then understand religion. So there's a definition you now got to get to. Well, what does someone mean by religion, for example, or organized religion? But the point I'd like to pick up on, which you mentioned about how did this all start?
Yeah, that's a good point.
To be honest, most societies historically were religious, and when I mean religious, I mean there was no distinction between private and public life. If you look at Aztec, Inca, Mayan, Zoroastrian, Byzantine, Roman, etc., you find that God played, or a deity played, a very, very public life. So the concept of atheism or even agnosticism just in world history was like didn't exist almost, you could argue. Yeah, if there might be one.
So is there more of an atheism and universal, or to put it in a simplest term, are they gaining popularity?
They're not universal. And we've got to appreciate what does universal mean. Is that people are not born atheists. They are not what you will generally find. And if you look at from an Islamic perspective,
born religious either.
Well, Islam would argue that if you left a human being alone, he would come to the natural conclusion that there is a creator. What the essence and the entity of that creator is, he can't come to, but he would come to naturally a creator, which they said if you left him on the fitra, as they would use, he would come to that. But you would normally
fitra meaning natural disposition.
Yeah. But normally what you would find is that a child, like any child, it depends on which household he grows up in. If he grows up in an atheist household, chances are he's going to be atheist. Grew up in a Muslim household, chances are you're going to be Muslim. It's just your surroundings that will have the impact, because you're a child, you can't discern anything in that way. But just coming back to the history point is the atheists have taken traction. The agnosticism has taken traction for a different reason. Atheism has taken traction, especially over the last 10, maybe 20 years. More 10 years
in the West?
In the West, simply because of there is secularism. People have been living secular lives, but they need meaning to life. And what they found is we had a challenge with the church in Western society, which is that the church oppressed them. Church couldn't provide that. Philosophers came up with the theory of dividing the church and the religion. When they did that, more effectively, more and more people over decades and decades started questioning, well, if I don't need God in my public life, what am I going to do with in my private life? Is there even a God? And what you've then found is that the atheists have moved in. People have come up with new theories saying that there's actually no God. You can live a moral life. You can be just. You come up with these constructs on your own. You don't need a supreme being or God or a prophet or anybody else to tell you. A human being by his mind can work out what is moral, what is not, what is just, what is not, what is right, what is wrong.
So you're saying atheism is not universal, it's just it's not a default position, yeah? What about you, Nizal? I mean, how would you look at that?
If you look at the globe, you can actually see different civilizations who've never really had contact with each other. They always have they have an idea of sacredness. They have this notion of sacredness. They have a notion of
general people, you mean?
Yeah, they have a notion of religiousness, whatever that may be. So, one religion in one part of the world may be completely different to another, but essentially they still have this idea. So some religions, some parts of the world, they're very paganistic, and some religions are monotheistic. They believe in one God, and they're far removed from superstition. Yet they always have this notion of spirituality. And even if you were to look at secular societies, if you look at the Western world, if you look at where socialism, communism, all these isms, they've all come about through secularism, which is you separate the church from state because of certain historical events.
Church. I mean, can we make it a bit simpler? It's religion, separating religion from life. Yeah.
So historically, it was separating church because it was a European experience. It wasn't a Middle Eastern or a South American experience.
It wasn't a global experience.
It wasn't a global experience. Yeah? No, it was a European experience which they went through, and that's where the phrase actually came. It was literally separating church from state. Now they interpret that. They will say, well, actually separating any religion, because we've got more multicultural societies, etc., from state. So whether it's Jews, whether it's Christians, whether it's Muslims, whether it's Hindus, it's separating their religious affiliation from having an impact on what the state should do.
Why do you think they've done that?
One of the problems with that is...
Sorry, I know I'm going to digress a little bit. I just want to... because I think that's a very good point.
It's because fundamentally atheism and all these philosophical viewpoints that exist to do with secularism or atheism, they're fundamentally Orientalist. Okay, I know there's all these phrases all over the place.
Orientalist, explain, please. Okay, you're going to confuse our listeners.
So essentially, centuries ago, there's the idea that Europe was an advanced civilization. It's superior essentially, and any regions outside of Europe fall within what's called they're called the Orient. Now the Orient is not necessarily the Far East, so that includes parts like Latin America, Africa, Asia, Middle East. These are all considered the Orient. Now intellectual thinkers within Europe at that time in history, 500, 600, 800 years ago, were Orientalist, meaning they considered the pinnacle excellence of religion was whatever existed in Europe, which would have been the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith. And if the Catholic faith couldn't stand ground against, say, secularism, in their mind, no other religions, any other ethnic religions abroad, outside Europe, could be able to stand the might of atheism either. So, and the problem is as well, in their formation of having that Orientalist viewpoint, they presume that Christianity is, or at least Catholicism, has none of the flaws of other religions, but other religions have the same flaws as Christianity, which is far from the case.
We'll come to that when it comes to religion.
Maybe bringing it back home. Before the Orient, it was an internal struggle within Europe, within Europeans. Before they started importing those ideas, there was a ferocious internal struggle between within Europe, within the church and within the philosophers.
Yeah.
That struggle, I mean, you know, famous philosophers now, normally students learn about maybe in secondary school or even college, Bentham and his ilk, and before him, you know, Augustine and all of these, who are actually a priest, all of these types of characters. Some of them were priests that came from the church, but they realized, look what we're doing to our own civilization, look what we're doing to our own people, we're oppressing them, they're suffering.
But generally, just going back, the church was very oppressive, though, wasn't it?
I mean, the church was oppressive. And the point here being was that they thought to themselves, look, what can we do to make our situation for our own people, forget taking it anywhere else in the world for a moment, what can we do to reorganize our own societies where it's more of a level playing field, where the rich, he doesn't you have this situation now, to be honest, but the rich, you know, he could buy himself into heaven. The poor guy, you know, he's going to have to pay some priest or something like that to say 10 Hail Marys for him or something like that. It was literally that. It was that situation that led. And the philosophers came, and you had different types of philosophers over different decades, over different centuries coming and saying, look, maybe we should push religion out a little bit more. But they disputed over how much. Is it all the way? Is it halfway? Is it some of it? Is it no, let's just make sure, let's reorganize Christianity, the Protestant movement. Let's reorganize it.
So they kept the spiritual side, and when it came...
And eventually, when that battle lines were drawn and it kind of came to an end, they decided religion will get the private stuff, marriage, funeral, birth, that type of stuff, and the state will get everything else, taxes, how to organize society, what are the public rules, etc., etc. And what you're finding is the current society we live in is actually what's happening is religion has been pushed out further, and they've secularized even more, which has left space open for atheists to come with a new viewpoint and say, look, this is actually the meaning to life. You don't need God. Forget him. Or you don't need a deity or whatever you want to call it. Forget him. We can do this ourselves. So current atheists are actually, some of them seen as, you know, neo or new atheists.
Interesting you've discussed religion, but religion can be seen as being dogmatic and rigid and limiting thoughts, whereas atheism, atheist and secularism is seen as free-thinking, intellectual. I mean, how do you respond to this claim?
I mean, first of all, you got to look at who the claimants are. The claimants are the secularists and the so-called free thinkers themselves. No free thinker in his right mind is going to say, I'm a dogmatic person. Even the Muslim scholars don't say that about themselves. So you look at what the claims
they've given those labels.
So they've given them labels. But secondly, the reality is that they look at religion from their experience of Europe. They are not looking at Islam from its own standpoint, from its own experiences, because Islam didn't have that same
they're
problem.
Not just talking about Islam, they're mixing all religion together.
That's precisely the problem.
Because even in Islam, we can see that there is some issues. In other religions, there's some issues. They see all of these problems, what they see as problems, and they will mix everything together and say, well, look, you know, religion is a problem. It's the thing that's dividing and so on and so forth.
But that's precisely the problem, because there is the assumption, as my brother made, was that Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and all these other isms are the same thing. They're all together in the same boat. Whereas Islam is unique. It didn't have that experience. It organized society in such a way that it flourished. It was successful. Did it have problems? Of course. Any human civilization has problems. That's quite normal. But it flourished. It produced thinkers, historically Muslim scholars and even non-Muslim scholars who are very broad in their thinking. And even to this day, you could argue that some Western historians argue that the reason secularism and liberalism came in is because it's the Muslim scholars that translated Greek works. So this idea that suddenly you're free thinking and I'm not, I could go through whole loads of schools of thoughts that were very free thinking. For example, the Mu'tazila, very rational people. You see, more rational than some of these people, you could even argue.
But then they were considered.
But they had their issues. The point I'm saying is the society Islam organized didn't limit anyone's thinking. It let you discuss. It had parameters, like any society has parameters. This society has parameters. You can't do or say certain stuff. But it allowed you to think.
Why do you think they feel that is rigid and is you know, it doesn't have an Islamic basis, intellectual basis? Why do you think the atheists and the secularists, they view religion? I mean, Nizal, you can come in, you know, please.
So what I would say is, one of the key issues with atheism, many people would think it's irreligion, it's anti-religion, it's nothing to do with religion, but at the same time it has a dogma of its own. It's dogmatic in its own right. So it has sets of ideas which it takes as fact, and that's essentially what dogma is. When you take something that's unproven and you accept it as a fact, and you allow that fact to mold your opinions and your views elsewhere. And essentially atheists, they've taken the European experience with all that historical baggage, and so they then push over, lots of slogans, lots of phrases, which form, you can say, they're pillars of faith. For example, when they say religion causes wars and things like this, they need to qualify those statements. They have to, if they say that religion is bad, which parts of religion specifically is bad? So, for example, they'll point out the clergy. In history in Europe, the problem with the clergy was celibacy. The priest would never marry, so that led to child sex abuse. But do you have that? Within the Muslim world and imams in general, they do marry. This is something we don't have a clergy as such. Islam has never ever encouraged the notion of a clergy. So you find a lot of our scholars, our classical scholars, they actually took the leaders to account. They spoke up to the leaders. Our most prominent scholars in history took leaders to account. This is not something a clergyman would do. The clergy historically in Europe were infamous with siding with the state. In fact, the church, we use this term, this very secular...
Why do they say dogmatic and rigid? Why?
Because that was their experience in Europe of how they saw the
because
Christians.
They've already decided on an idea and that's it. Whether you like it or lump it.
It's because a religion, organized religion, gives certain parameters. So, for example, in Islam, you have to pray, you have to fast. The month of Ramadan is coming up. You have to fast 29 days, for example. You have to go Hajj if you can. It's organized and it's quite... not rigidly, because that has a negative connotation when I say it, but it's actually systemized. It's done in a systemized way.
Do you think they can appreciate that?
The problem that they have is they're coming from, when you say, why do they look at it? Well, what are they comparing to? And we'll appreciate why they're looking at it like that. They're comparing to, I am free, I can do what I want. God shouldn't tell me what to say. So a person then approaching an organized religion, anyone will look at it, hold on a second, it restricts me. But the fundamental question to ask is, who should decide what is right or wrong? Because
I think you've just hit the nail on the head. Restrictions. I think do you think that's the problem here, that this religion restricts your thinking or your progression? What do you think?
Within political secularism, which is essentially a style of a type of government, a model of government, which is, you find it across the entire world, even the Muslim world. That's where you separate religion from society, from the state. Even if people practice religion in their personal lives, you find when you have a secular society, you find atheistic ideas and agnostic ideas. They're prevalent everywhere. So on the bus, the advert which says there probably is no God, stop worrying and enjoy life. You also have other phrases that are so mainstream, such as you only live once. These phrases which we take for granted, you only live once, is essentially telling you to just do what you want. There is no last day. But we know in Islam it's a fundamental faith, fundamental principle to believe in the last day, to believe in a judgment day. And in fact, this notion of a judgment day is very linked.
After life,
it's linked to the belief in a God. If you don't believe in a God, you don't believe in a last day, and therefore it leads to freedom. Enjoy yourself, do what you want. And secularism today, and this goes back to one of the questions you said, if atheism is universal. But people in nature, in the very nature of people within their psychology, they always have something sacred. And if you have a society, a government that removes religion from society, what happens is the people, they have this need to make something sacred. So in this society, if it's not Christianity, it then starts to become notions of freedom. The way they fold the flag. In America, the way they fold the flag is very holy, it's very sacred. When it comes to...
So they do have rituals as well,
They have rituals, of course.
So we have Eid and
the poppies,
we have Ramadan.
And things. When the Queen comes out and she takes the poppies out, it's very ritualistic. All of this is sacred. That you cannot remove the sacred instinct, the reverent instinct from the human nature. It's always there, and if you don't challenge it in the correct way, you'll end up using it towards nationalism.
Interesting. Let me take a text. We've got a couple of texts here, but I think that's relevant to what we are discussing here. It says, "Thank you for the show. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the show. Why is atheism on the rise and religion like Christianity becoming virtually redundant in the West?
That's a good question. I mean, to be honest, just picking up on that, there was a poll done a couple of years ago where they found that churches were closing down. There were less people going to church, and churches were closing down. And then they found that those churches were being turned.
The Muslims are buying them out.
The churches were being turned into pubs. The pub were buying them, and the churches were being turned into pubs. What you have to appreciate is people live in this country, and it doesn't matter how you slice it. It doesn't matter who you are. You are affected by the system that you live in. You grow up here, it affects you. If you're constantly being pushed with, as my brother said, about enjoy yourself, don't worry about religion, don't be serious when you're too young, don't be serious in the middle of your life, you're still young when you're 35 and etc. and etc., you're going to behave like that. And what people will do is naturally people need meaning to life. The 6.7 billion people have that one question in common. Where did I come from? What's life about? What happens to me when I die? That's something that binds everybody. And they need answers to that. And what's happened, because people live a secular life, we don't want God. What can I fill that void with? And in come with the atheist saying, well, look, actually, why don't you do it this way? Which is, there was no God. Don't worry about God. He never existed. We came through a process of evolution over millions and millions and millions and millions of years. And really, there's nothing after when you die, so just enjoy life, which still fits into the framework of secularism. And hence what you're finding is these types of atheists are now being heavily pushed because it fits in with the system. It fits, and so the system gives them space.
Interesting point.
If you said something against the system, which didn't fit in, like I think we should have religion in the public space, etc., so you'd find you'd be marginalized, demonized, etc., etc.
Well, that's a very good point. Let me just quickly announce. Basically, we are moving this show. The show will be moved to Thursday night at 9 p.m. So please join us. Thursday night, 9 p.m. If you've just joined us now, we're discussing the rise of atheism and secularism. Inshallah, in the studio, we have Brother Bashir and Brother Nizal Hussain. So please do send your text in, or if you want to ring, you can ring up, and you can make a point, you can make a comment, you can ask a question, really. So go for it, inshallah. Again, I want to go back on one of the principles of atheism. Is that intellect alone is sufficient to explain what is right and wrong. Because we use, for Muslims, we use the Quran to say, look, this is right, this is wrong. They're saying intellect alone is enough to say this is right and this is wrong. As morality is natural, so there is no need for religion. What's your thoughts?
Well, to do with that, if it's an atheist argument, but at the same time it's a position held by secularism as a political system in general, and Britain is secular, even though officially for England,
Europe is secular.
Europe is secular, yes, the Western world, even the Muslim world is secular. And what's interesting?
Well, the whole world is secular because no one is ruling by any
religion. So fair enough, So essentially, the world is secular, but I'm referring mainly to that muscular secularism that started off in the Western world.
You're not talking about Cameron, are you?
Yes. With that secularism, you find over the decades within Britain itself alone, the morals, what essentially is right and wrong changes depending on which decade you're in. So what was acceptable in the 60s may not be acceptable in the 70s. What's acceptable now may not necessarily have been acceptable in the 40s or the 60s. So during that space of time, people were defining morals, what's right and wrong, by intellect anyway. So clearly intellect alone cannot decide what's right and wrong because it still hasn't agreed upon it. It still hasn't agreed yet. If it was essentially a case of, intellectually 1 + 1 is 2, right? That's resolved, full stop. It doesn't matter which era in history you belong to, which part of the world, whether you're in France or in the UK. It's intellectually solvable.
Complex, isn't it?
It's solvable. Intellectually, that's solvable, 1 + 1. But if you look at moral questions, they're not solvable by intellect. If they were, our standards of right and wrong would be the same across the whole of Europe, would be the same across the secular world, would be the same irrespective of which decade you go to. But it isn't. So clearly it cannot be solved intellectually.
So just adding to that, I mean, you can take a couple of recent cases or things people can appreciate. For example, it wasn't long ago in this country where homosexuality was not allowed. It wasn't long ago. Now it's promoted as if you don't believe in homosexuality, you're the problem case. And it tells you was only some of the same MPs were against it, now they're for it. Some of these same MPs were against it, now they've changed their mind, which tells you that the mind is no place to make those types of judgments. One person's experience, his prejudices, what he likes, what he dislikes, suddenly that one guy deciding upon what everybody else should be doing is just...
So how should they decide
So
then?
From our perspective, it's we believe in a creator, and that all-knowing creator who can encompass, and he makes all realities, he knows all realities, he's the creator of all of those realities, is best suited to tell you what to do and what not to do. If he's the maker of everything, if he made you, he made your instincts, he made your organic needs, he made your mind, he made your brain, he made your heart, he made your body, he gave you your limbs, he put you in this world, he is in the best position to tell you what to do and what to not to do, what is right and what is wrong. Because he knows everything. The premise we come from is that he knows everything.
Well, sorry, you want to come in?
Yeah, with secularism, it's answered the question of morality to some extent. It's stated essentially, you're free to do what you want to do. So you can do what you want to do. There is actually there's no absolute definition of right and wrong. This is what they say. There's no absolute definition of right or wrong. You can do what you want to do. You have the freedom to do what you want to do, provided you don't harm anyone. Now, at face value,
that makes sense.
At face value, it makes sense. At face value, it seems very fair.
It sounds very plausible.
It sounds plausible, but then on the other hand, if you see how that progresses into reality, you have situations where it's been in the media itself, where you have situations of first-degree incest, which is legalized. So that's between a brother and sister, or between a daughter and a father. There's been the recent case where a son and a mother are having a baby together, they're in love, etc. and so on, and their basis is freedom, because essentially, if a society adopts freedom in its education system, it's taught the idea of freedom, it's within the constitution, right? Freedom has become one of those sacred ideas. It's something that's very sacred. It's personal, emotionally attached to you, but at the same time, it's used as a political tool to justify wars. So this freedom is a very powerful unit. And what position does anyone have, if you really think about it? What can you say? What basis can you stand upon to disagree with first degree incest? How do you disagree with that? Because
on what basis?
Because to be fair, they're consenting adults. They've chosen to do it.
Interesting point you've actually made.
Just on that point,
that's
actually a reason against why freedom doesn't make intellectual sense. I would dispute with you on that, because they're two consulting adults. One's, let's say, a 30-year-old, one's a 35-year-old, and they want to commit incest. They're not harming anyone. They're not doing anything
under freedom.
They're not harming anyone, but in a free society, they're being told you can't do that because they realize there are boundaries. But you're saying that if someone's free and they're not harming someone, they can do what they like. But clearly, these two people can't. The law tells them you can't do this, even though they're not harming anybody.
So they are actually going against their principles.
It's effectively going against their principle. And this is the point. You have to put down red lines somewhere. How do you decide where to put them down? Do you put them down based on, is it harmful or is it not? Do you put them down based on, well, as long as two consenting adults say it's okay, it's okay? Where do you put that line? Where do you draw that line? In this country,
how do you come to
in this country, the way they draw that line is in Parliament, effectively.
Okay, now going back, I think
I'm just going to quickly,
but
it's on Parliament. How those parliamentarians come to that judgment might be based on bias, might be based on someone's paid them off.
Is it
might
based on religion?
Highly unlikely.
Bush was religious. Blair was very religious.
I mean, Bush said later that God spoke to him, but maybe Shaitan was speaking to him. I mean, let's be honest about it. But it's about how you draw that line. The Islam, our premise, our argument is that we draw that line based on text, on the text of the Quran, on the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is fundamentally at odds with secularism. They do not draw lines like that. We are a textual people. We look at text and we say, Quran says it's allowed, Quran says it's not allowed. The example of the Prophet says it's allowed. The example of the Prophet says it's not allowed.
Parliament. I want to quickly come in. He said, some may say mixing religion with politics can be dangerous. European history shows this, and we can see this problem within the Muslim world today. Yeah. Do you think the problem in the Muslim world is that too much religion has been mixed with politics?
No, religion hasn't been mixed with politics. That's a misnomer.
Saudi Arabia.
That's precisely the misnomer. You get me?
Iran.
It's a monarch. Saudi Arabia is a democracy, apparently. Don't you not know Pakistan's a democracy?
Yeah, they implement secularism.
This is precisely the problem.
We've discovered that we've had a show on the Islamic ruling in Pakistan. Yeah, the legislation. What was it? Can't remember, but basically there was some law that the Islamic law, and obviously the parliament. I
think you may be talking about the blasphemy law and the blasphemy case.
That's it. That was I'm trying to think.
We
on
need
top
to.
Of my head.
We especially as people who are interested in the Middle East and in our home countries, and as Muslims, we need to get to grips with why is Islam being used in our countries. I'm going to change that word "used" to why is it being abused. Naturally, our people are Muslim in the region, so they have to play the Islam card. Otherwise, it won't work. You can't go to a Muslim society.
So they're not mixing politics and
but
religion.
they're abusing it to get their way. But really, in most cases, they're tyrants. In a lot of cases, they're trying to be secular, but it's not washing with the people because the people, by their nature, are Muslim.
But that's the point, isn't it? That's the point that some would argue that look, if they were secular to the teeth, yeah. If they separated completely, then it would be progressive, because there is these religious ideas that are coming in, and the blasphemy law, for example. But imagine if they didn't have an issue with that.
But that doesn't. But then that would be a problem with us, because we have our lines are drawn in different ways. So for us, we do care about someone blaspheming against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We hold that dear. We don't hold corporates dear, for example. That's one. To say that secularism will work, well, let's look at secular societies. Are they actually successful? Can you say that they have organized society in a way which has been successful?
But obviously they're progressive.
Are they progressive?
Are they not?
What is
because
progressive?
If you look at the West,
okay,
they've led in science, in technology, in development, in.
They're all the same thing.
Yeah, but the thing is, they are developing.
But I'm saying, what is every society develops
education-wise.
That's debatable, but every society develops. Every society develops education, technological. Every society. The idea that the West is the only societies that develop technologically is just false.
Japan, Japan. Look at Japan. Yeah, Japan within 40 years, they've become very, very successful, because they left their ways and they've adopted secularism. They adopted secular society. The whole system is secular. How would you argue with this?
I'm not saying secular societies haven't done well technologically. I'm saying, is that the definition of success?
Okay.
This is the point to make. But just to say secular societies advanced technologically is, I would say, incorrect. Other societies have done it. Muslim societies were historically technologically advanced. This is well known. I think it was Packard Hewitt, her CEO, who gave a speech about that, where she mentioned that before us there were these Muslims who did very, very well.
Why was that? Why are they not being successful now?
But this is the discussion.
I know. I don't want to move the discussion, but just a quick.
It's that. Why I would argue the reason our societies are less successful today than they were before is the lack of implementation of Islam, one, and second, it's got to do with foreign interference. Why we can't implement Islam is due to foreign interference.
Okay, very good. Nizal, you wanted to
yes.
Sorry,
so first of all, Japan is in a massive recession of its own, bigger than any of the European countries, and on top of that, Japan itself, in terms of foreign interference, Japan is very poor in terms of natural resources.
Okay.
So it's never really had a situation where it had to deal with outside foreign interference trying to conquer its territory. And it's quite remote from the rest of the world. It's all the way in the Far East. The closest country in terms of the Western world is probably US.
Yep.
But it still falls within US, the US influence in terms of US economic scope. That's why it benefits. Now, the situation is with the Muslim world, we need to make a distinction that brown countries do not mean they are Islamic countries. There is difference. That's a very important difference. So we need to understand that the Muslim world, they are secular, even if many governments in the Muslim world do officially accept Islam as a state religion. They have to, because the majority of the population are Muslim, and it just won't wash. Their authority won't last very long if they declared openly they're secular. So they have to provide these symbolic gestures to the Muslim public. But essentially, how they govern their countries.
The public opinion is for Islam in the Muslim world.
It is, and it always has been.
Even though it's been ruled by dictators and
of course, many of the iconic dictators in the Muslim world who are usually branded as Islamic are actually very secular. Saddam Hussein, he's secular. President Assad in Syria, he's secular. Colonel Gaddafi, with whatever big turban he used to wear, he's secular. So you find again and again, of the 57 countries, most people won't be able to name even 5 countries that claim to be Islamic. So forget whether they are Islamic or not. Even if you were to find countries which, and when we say Islamic, we're not talking about if the public practice Islam or not. That's not for us to judge. That's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to decide, really. But we're talking about the political system itself that the governments implement, because Islam has many dimensions to it.
Can I quickly stop you on this, because we're receiving quite a few texts, inshallah. So I'm just going to read one out. I think that's quite relevant, actually. He said, we find there are Muslims who are becoming atheists after being Muslim all their lives. And they say without being Muslim, they are free now and think for themselves. What do you have to say? I think they are referring to Mr. Musaffir Islam, who has gone online. He's a YouTuber, and he thinks he's intellectual. He's he's left Islam officially. And he's I think everyone knows about him. And what do you have to say? I mean, the text says, look, there are Muslims who are living and they feel that they're intellectuals because they've left Islam.
They're rebelling against culture rather than Islam.
There's a cultural point, but I think there's also, I don't know about this particular character, but I don't take him too seriously. But there is a point about we need to be able to tell our own Muslims and even the wider non-Muslim society about how you come to Islam. There is a thing about Muslims are born up in a Muslim household, and they never explained why we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what are the proofs of his existence, etc., etc. However, that needs to be done. But you have to look at it from the other side, which is you've got secularists and the Prime Minister of the country who wants to push that particular agenda. We don't want Muslims to be living Islam in the way Islam basically tells us. That's a problem. And when that is pushed, you're going to get people who get funded, who get aided, who get platform, etc., etc., pushing that, and they will push a particular narrative, whether it's a secular narrative, whether it's an atheist narrative, whether it's an agnostic narrative, whether it's we're all Abrahamic faith narrative, and that creates confusion within Muslims, and you will find maybe even a small majority who leave because they think, you know what, actually that makes more sense because I've never been exposed to the Islamic intellectual argument for why.
Can I pause you on this? Because it's true. A lot of the Muslims, especially, I've been to Bangladesh and other countries, there isn't an intellectual understanding that's been given to them. Alhamdulillah, now we can go online and we can listen to debates, and we can watch a lot of the shows which proves that how God exists and how everything else is. We have that facility. But if you look at some of those, especially our elders, they were born in Islam and they just accepted, like you said, natural fitra. So do you think that it's about time that Muslims actually discuss the Aqidah from an intellectual basis?
That's the way we should do it. It's not simply because it's the time for it, it's a need of its time. That's true, but also simply because that's how Islam tells us to teach our children. That is the correct method of teaching our kids. That look, the way we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists is because of the creation and effectively the intelligent design.
Cause and effect and all of these
types of things. But what we have to be wary about is that we have to do that at this moment simply because more so simply because there is an agenda to make sure that our children and our community is not like that, doesn't think like that, and people will come with what will seemingly seem like very intellectual arguments against you. And in that sense, we have to be ready ourselves to say, hold on a second, we can actually tell you why that's wrong. We can't sit back and, this person's left and that person's left. It's only one or two.
We can't be dogmatic. That's what you're saying.
We've got to think about.
We have to explain. With an atheist, we should be able to explain that God exists, and we should give that intellectual discussion that he is seeking. Yeah.
Otherwise, what you will find is that there are more Muslims who are effectively what you would argue leaving the religion. The other thing we've got to be careful about isn't just them leaving. Maybe a bigger problem is being secular, because the government is more than willing to tolerate. You believe in God, you believe in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but you know what? Keep him private. Don't bring him to the public. Keep him in the corner somewhere. And that is something we'll have to also deal with, because that's something that's already at our doorstep, unfortunately.
I'm going to read out a text which is just making a comment, but I think it's relevant. It says, education system under secular systems promotes a bias and presents theories as facts, i.e. evolution. How does this affect Muslim children and even people of other religion? How should Muslims respond to this reality? We even find atheism is becoming popular amongst educated class in Muslim countries in Bangladesh. That's a very, very important question here, because we know in Bangladesh it's called Gnostic. Yeah, there are a lot of people that move into that sect. Yeah, and it's seen as progressive, and this is what I was saying before. That look, why is it that it's seen as progressive? Yeah, and we have Taslima Nasreen, Naslima Nasreen, I think her name is. She wrote books against Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We had other people. Just it's free range at this moment, so people can write what they want. How do you deal with this?
I think an important thing to look at with Western secular society is that you have at the lower level
becoming popular. Yes. The question is becoming popular.
At the lower level, you have people who have everyday practices, or they have just customs and parts of their tradition, whether it's going to the pub, whether it's going out clubbing and so on. That's one dimension at the lower end of the spectrum. But within that society, you then have a government, you have an ideological structure, you have a system that's secular within its constitution, right? That's at the higher end, and it's promoting its viewpoints through the education system. Yeah. Now, if let's just say, just imagine the theoretical situation. If let's just say that political construct, that whole political system was to collapse, right? And those people, Bob and Dave, they left the UK because its economy collapsed, and they moved to, say, Nigeria. Right, they moved to Nigeria, and Bob and Dave would still carry on their custom of going to the pub. Right, they'd still carry on their custom of eating.
In Nigeria,
if they have a pub in Nigeria, they'd probably open one up. Right, they'd open one up just as Muslims open up masjids here. Now, this the issue with Bob and Dave in Nigeria. He would have lost his ideology. He may not be able to form intellectual atheistic arguments against the Christians in Nigeria over time. Let's say Nigeria became an ideological power in future, but a religious one. So you begin to see that the people alone, without an ideological state above them to provide an umbrella, they essentially just have traditions and culture, and this is what has happened in the Muslim world.
Very interesting.
So we have our grandparents and their parents before them. What they inherited in terms of Islam were the cultures, the traditions, religious practices, no doubt, definitely, but they lost the outer umbrella, the top umbrella, the ideological system above to protect them, to educate them in that way forward. And back to the brother was saying about blaspheme laws in Pakistan and whatnot. We need to understand this is not something necessarily dogmatic. Blaspheme laws exist everywhere, even in the free world. Okay, but the difference is well, for example, gagging orders in favor of celebrities or corporates, for example, because we live in a capitalist society. So what they hold as sacred and valuable will not be religion.
So just picking up on the brother's point, that's actually a very good point, because not long ago there were pictures taken by, I think, an Irish newspaper of Kate, the Princess Kate, whatever her name is.
Kate.
I forget.
What is it? The Windsor.
Whatever her name is. They took, and she was nude. and there was a gagging order issued saying that you can't reprint these pictures. And so no newspaper in this country, even though it's free, freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of taking pictures, etc., all that type of stuff, nobody reprinted those pictures because they value that as, no, we can't do that to the Queen's, you know, son's wife and etc. etc. This is the, so they have that. The other thing to appreciate from the questioner is he used two very crucial words: education system. He said the education system, or she said the education system is promoting it. The education system is run by a state. That state has infinite resources at its disposal. It can do what it likes.
He's saying effectively, what I'm saying is saying, what is a theory can be something a fact.
So you can give something to any child, our children, other children, and we might be able to help our children, but not everybody can. The point I'm making is because it's done under an education system, it's done across the country, it's funded well, it's got people who are in place to do that. In order to tackle that, you're not going to do it by one small thing where I might be able to help my child, but someone else might not be. The way to tackle a system is with an alternative system. You've got to come with, look, we've got to set up a system of our own in our lands based on our values and what we want to teach our kids. Why is it wrong for secularists to teach their kids and within their schools about evolution? That's what they believe.
Interestingly, I think
but shouldn't we do the same in our own countries?
Yeah, a couple of months ago, I think there was a teacher. He or she said evolution is a theory. Yeah, and for that, I think she's got a lot of stick from the media. So really, media is a lot to play as well.
This is my point: is the whole
system.
The whole system is the media is a part of the government's wing. The idea that the media is independent and works separate to the government is not true. But the point to understand is that when we're trying to protect our own values under this barrage, you're not going to do it with for all of the good intents with a small community. You need another system to fight that system. You're going to need another intellectual, ideological system to fight that system, to pummel effectively its message out through its broadcasting machine, like they do across the world. The BBC Broadcasting
CNN
Corporation.
Yeah. Okay. Let me move on to another angle. I want to try and cover this subject from a different angle. It says, is religion to be blamed for most of the conflict in the world? Yeah. So, for example, you've got Palestine, Syria, you've got all the wars. Can we blame religion for that? Because some would argue that this.
I would argue you'd have to look at each individual case. Palestine is not a religious problem; it's an occupation problem by
Jews
the Israelis.
And the Muslims.
But who put the Jews there? The British under the British mandate. Who were the British? If you look at Iraq again, who attacked? If you look at Afghanistan,
but now they're fighting because of different sects.
But that's the story that they've given us. That's the other thing we've got to be wary about. That's one. The other thing is, if you look at two of the worst wars in human history are World War I and World War II. Religion had nothing to do with World War II. Not to mention the Cold Wars between the Soviet Union and the Western allies, basically. They, again, had nothing to do with religion. It was both were against secularism versus communism in the Cold War. And in the Second World War, it was the Nazis against the Western allies, the NATO,
but
effectively.
What I mean by, if you look at Islam's got this idea, jihad, these concepts here, and that's what they are talking about, isn't it? Like whenever there's a conflict, you bring religion in and say, look, okay, we need to fight. This is jihad. How would you? Is it not the case?
When you look at, for example, Palestine as a conflict, but even including when you're talking about jihad, the thing is, this is a typical preaching of atheism. Atheism, in many respects, is a religion in its own right. Secularism is a religion in its own right. This preaching that religion causes wars, religion causes conflicts, it's like a mantra. They keep hymning the same thing over and over again. You see this recently, there's a documentary on the history of Jerusalem, and the emphasis there right from the beginning was this is a centuries-old conflict caused by religion. Now, we need to understand that when atheists presents this angle that, it's caused by religion, you look at the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's the funny thing is, what's really interesting is, while atheists keep plugging this idea that religion caused it, many of the modern secular countries like Germany and Britain, the British government and the German government, who are responsible for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they clear their hands of any responsibility for a conflict they caused they are essentially allowing it to prolong. Right.
Well, they initiated that.
They initiated, but they're also prolonging
people.
it. Of course, they're prolonging it as well, because Germany, for example, makes an absolute fortune by selling weapons to Israel still today. You know, so it's something that's being prolonged, and we need to see that link, which is atheism is not just a mere belief that, you know, God doesn't exist. The link is with the government as well. So long as this atheist angle exists, that the Palestinian conflict is a classic conflict caused by religion, the British secular government and the German secular government will never have to take responsibility for this conflict.
Okay,
that's a very key point.
I think we have to just quickly, we have to appreciate
that's fine, go for it.
It's not a conflict, it's an occupation. The reason I say that is because a conflict sounds as if there's two equal sides and they're fighting each other. That's not what's happening. What's happening is there's one side being funded, as the brother said, by Germany and the British, which is the Israeli occupiers, against the people who have historically been there for decades and decades and decades. And that whole scenario came about because basically the British, under the British mandate, when Palestine was under them, which they carved from the Ottoman state, who had ownership or who was ruling that land, and it was peaceful. They basically carved and then they filled it up with the Zionists. They did all these types of explosions and stuff to get the British to hand it over, but they effectively filled it up with thing. So we've got to realize is that these people have their hands in these places. These so-called, or these secularists who so-called peaceful, you'd find that in most cases they've got their fingers somewhere where they're either selling weapons or they're being the original
on the surface. Are you saying on the surface they are showing that religion is because of these conflicts, that they have differences?
The atheists have a different agenda. They just don't like religion. They'll point to anything that they can possibly find. But the more dangerous in that category are the secularists, because their issue here is not religion. Their issue here is we want to keep control. We want to be in charge.
Politically motivated.
Yes, the words I'm looking for.
Okay, all right. I want to talk about Islam, actually. How does Islam view atheism and secularism? How does it view from just looking at atheism and secularism? What does it have to say?
There's a view in regards to how Islam views atheism and also how Muslims view secularism. How Islam views atheism, we know that when the Dajjal comes, you know, one of the things he will teach is that there is no God. That's the first thing he'll teach, and then he'll teach eventually that he is God. So this is, you know, this whole flavor of agnosticism, the idea that is there a God, there may not be a God, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. The trend towards secularism and atheism, that's already started anyway. But as for whether the Muslim world needs it, first of all,
not Muslim world. I want. What does Islam from Aqidah point of view, belief point of view? How does it view secularism?
I mean, atheism. Atheism is simple. It rejects that outright, because in Islam the central premise is that there is a God. I mean, any child can tell you, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. It's as it does not recognize atheism in any form, in any theory, in any of that type of stuff.
What secularism?
Secularism, now there is a dispute about what Islam says it looks like. So what I mean by that is you are finding today people under the name of reform saying that Islam promotes secularism.
That's the point.
This is the issue, However, if you look through classical texts, classical resources, classical scholars, and how they understood Islam, and even the example of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, then the Tabi'in and the Tabi'in, who are regarded as the best generation, they had no divide in their brain. There was Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us everything. He tells us how to run a country. He tells us what the policies are. He tells us what my relationship with my wife is. How do I get married? How much zakat I pay? Do I go Hajj? What do I name my children? So forth and so forth. There is no divide. And for example, most of the time you find the famous ayah, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ ظَالِمُونَ كَافِرُونَ. Whoever does not rule by what Allah revealed. Now the question here is, what is the consequence of who doesn't rule? He's kafir, he's zalim, he's an oppressor, he's a rebellious person. The ulama then discuss about what did Allah reveal. So he revealed us a sharia, which means law, and in this law there's a books of buyu, buying, selling, nikah, getting married, the education, what do I teach my children, there's all of this type of stuff.
Why I'm saying that?
The reason I'm making that point, just to quickly finish, is simply because there is a push to secularize Islam, to make it go down the path of Christianity.
You talked about the reason I'm saying that is because you talked about our scholars and our historical. Gave a historical account, but you find a lot of the modern scholars now that they argue that, look, as long as justice prevails, if, like, for example, this country, they will say, look, there is justice, so therefore we can live under this society and we can also implement Islam. We don't need to publicly implement or politically strive to achieve Islamic rules or whatever, because as long as if we can implement it within ourselves, then it's fine, because there is justice. Under secularism, they can see justice.
I mean, there is that case, and normally that's the maqasid argument that these ulama try and bring. Now, there's two issues here. There's first of the
maqasid being
the values, the goals of the Sharia. Okay. Now, the first, there's the effects,
or the benefit of the Sharia,
even the benefits, maybe, but
which were not stated by the Prophet ﷺ. They were these are based on human intellect. It's opinions.
So there is objectives. However, there's two areas. There's one of Muslim scholars. There's one of objectives. In terms of every society wants justice. Which society doesn't? Nazis wanted justice. It's how you define that. What does that mean, and how you achieve it? Every society wants tolerance, but how do you define that, and what does it mean? The way Islam defines these things is not the same as the way the secularists define these things. The manner in which we define these things via text is not the way the secularists define it. That is the splitting part. For us, those two things are very important. How does Islam define it, and the manner it does it in? That's one area. In terms of, unfortunately, some of our ulama, and there are ulama who say, actually, no, this is what Islam says, is that we've got to implement Sharia. Those particular ulama, what you find is the problem isn't fiqh. The problem isn't they don't have knowledge or they're not pious. I don't know. I don't know these people, personally. But that's not their issue. Their issue is that they look at it from the angle of, we see the West. What we see of the West in its technological advancement, we see greatness, we see advancement, we see people eating and all of this type of stuff. And we want that for our societies. On top of that, they're being attacked by the secularists, saying, how comes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam married a 9-year-old? How comes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam waged jihad? Why did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam take a concubine? Why did, for example, in the Sharia, a man can marry 4 women, but the women can't marry 4? Under that attack, they're collapsing. So in their mind, they're thinking, I've got to rebuttal this, but you know what? I want to be peaceful and nice with them, and I want to not make them attack the Sharia. So then they come up with weird and wonderful answers. That was back in those days, people used to marry 4 times because there weren't enough men around, because they were all going doing jihad. So now we don't have that, so you don't need to do that anymore.
We do, actually. There's more women.
Do you see? Or they'll argue, but it was something back then and we don't do it now. The problem is the mindset of, why do you feel under attack by the West? Why do you feel that I've got to appease them? Why do you feel I have to give an answer that they like, rather than saying, hold on a second, these people who are attacking us, are they in any position to question us about how to organize society, considering how their own society is organized? And this goes back to my earlier point about, is their societies really successful? If you look at abortion rates, if you look at broken families,
the measure of success, isn't it? Is it technology?
Is it successful? Before we start talking about Islam, you're coming with, we should do it your way. Tell me first that your model is successful. Why did your Prime Minister, David Cameron, call this society a broken Britain? How comes he can make that statement? But I bet you if a Muslim said that, would be a problem. So these things, we've got to be a bit more politically in tune, I believe.
Okay, Nizal.
Can I just say, but
final
even,
word, we want to try and, I think we've just gone over time, but
because it's not just looking at negativity that's taking place in the West as such. In the Muslim world as well, there are social problems, there are political problems, but they're a byproduct of the Muslim countries being secular. And the difference is, Europe became secular by its own evolution. It developed towards secularism as a result of oppression by the church. The Muslim world did not have the same thing. The Muslim world did not naturally progress towards becoming secular. It was thrust upon it. So this is, we look at, if anyone, any of the listeners were to study,
engineered, you mean?
Essentially, if you study the last 100 years of the Muslim world, a lot of the secular governments, well, pretty much all the secular governments there today, that exist today, they were manufactured, they were placed there. So they're not a natural byproduct of internal struggle where the people rose up and then implemented those governments. That's not the case.
That's very interesting. Last point, I just want to quickly, I know you guys discussed so much, but freedom of speech, for example, that's something that they hold that, look, in the Muslim world, under Islamic ruling, will they have freedom of speech and belief? Can they say what they want to say? But in the Western world, if you look at it in a secular, really hardcore secular parts of the world, that's what they champion, isn't it? Yeah, that's what we champion. Look, freedom of speech. You guys can talk about, like this show here. You can criticize atheism. You can criticize religion. Well, not entirely. Not entirely. I mean, if it was on a mainstream platform, then certainly not. When they put Muslims on a mainstream platform on TV, it's usually an imam whose second language is English. Okay. They're usually cherry picking someone who we've never heard before, a Muslim person who never, a radical preacher who basically has no place within the Muslim community. No one's ever known him until he's cherry picked and placed on TV. And what you tend to find in the media itself, it's the freedom of speech is very much censored. Do you see? Okay. It's not called blaspheme laws, but it's called censorship. And the government is able to mold society based on what it's willing to censor. So based on political correctness, inverted commas, you can effectively influence what the public are exposed to, therefore influence their opinions and their way of thinking. So that's all essentially it is. Every society has a soul. Every society, I'm not talking about the individuals, every society has a culture, has a soul, has an ideology. And every civilization wants to protect that ideology, right? And to do that, it will limit freedom of speech to an extent. So, and that's even the case with secular, free, modern Western societies. Jazakallah khair, Nizal. I'm going to...
I'll be very quick. The thing to appreciate is we are not in a battle to win over or be like secularists. The point to understand, Islam does not want to organize its societies like that. You may have all the freedom of speech, you may have more freedom of speech than we do, but the competition is you have more than this and that. That's childish. What Islam is trying to do is organize a society that functions well. That might mean we need to limit some people from speaking about certain things, because we don't want to go around upsetting Jews and Christians and having a civil war and minority problems and all these types of stuff within our societies. They don't have that problem. They start up the problem, like the Channel 4 documentary, creates problems. We will be discussing next week. They try and... So we are not trying to organize our societies like that. The fundamental question is, it doesn't matter who's got what of more, is which society organizes better, that people get their rights and they're looked after. Not let's give everyone freedom so they can swear at whoever they like and create a problem within society, even though we want to hold on to this fanciful idea that you've all got freedom. Fantastic. So the point to understand is which system. I'm saying Islam does that. Some secularists will say secularism does that. Organizes society in a way that is harmonious, and that is the key. Jazakallah khair. Just like to end by thanking our guests for coming in and giving us an insight to this topic. It's a very big topic. I'm really sorry, brothers. I know you want to go on, but we have to end here. I think we've gone over time. We did have Maghrib break, so that's why we're finishing late. Thank you for staying with us and having that patience, inshallah. So Jazakallah khair to you, brothers, and a special thanks to all our listeners, and I hope you can join us next week at Straight Talk. Next week's show will be on the Channel 4 program, What British Muslim Really Think, which was aired this week, I think Wednesday. So very controversial program, so don't miss out. Tune in, and remember, it's next week Thursday 9 p.m. inshallah. So you can follow us on Twitter at Middle Path Radio and continue with this discussion. Please remember, it's Thursday next week, and don't forget, you can listen to this show and the previous ones that you may have missed by visiting our Straight Talk website, which is www.straight-talk.co.uk. Again, thank you for listening to Middle Path Radio. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Middle Path Radio, your #1 online Islamic talk station.